when I say I come from Mizoram, they would say, which country is that? Or, I would be asked for my passport in many instances. But
आपको अगर कहीं पे जाने से ये कहा जाए कि आप इधर हाथ नहीं लगा सकते या आप इस पानी के कुएं में से पानी नहीं भर सकते हैं या आप इस मंदिर में नहीं जा सकते हैं, put yourself in those shoes and then think, why would you not protest? We have traveled to places where electricity is still a thing. We have traveled to places where the water sources are separate for separate castes. One of my first introduction to kids in Himachal was that I went into the school armed with a book and I asked the principal if I could read to them. A couple of things I noticed there was that the kids had no idea that books existed outside their textbooks.
On today's episode of Just Curious podcast, we have with us Tanushree Singh and Hannah Lalhlanpuii. Tanushree और Hannah दोनों authors हैं और उन्होंने बुक लिखी है अंडर द सीरीज कॉल्ड सॉन्ग्स ऑफ फ्रीडम. तनुश्री की बुक का नाम है द लेटर टू लाहौर और हैना की बुक का नाम है पोस्ट कार्ड फ्रॉम द लुशाई ब्रिगेड. हमने फ्रीडम मूवमेंट के अराउंड हमारे जो बहुत सारे बड़े फ्रीडम फाइटर्स हैं उनकी स्टोरी सुनी है, बट ऐसे कई सारे लोग थे जिन्होंने छोटे कस्बों में रहकर, छोटे शहरों में रहकर भी फ्रीडम मूवमेंट के अंदर पार्ट लिया था. उनके लिए फ्रीडम का मीनिंग क्या था, फ्रीडम के अराउंड उनका पर्सपेक्टिव क्या था, वो आपको इन बुक्स के अंदर से जानने को मिलेगा. इट इज़ रिटन फ्रॉम अ चाइल्ड्स पर्सपेक्टिव, बट जब मैं ये बुक पढ़ रहा था तो मुझे भी कई सारे डिफरेंट पर्सपेक्टिव मिले अराउंड फ्रीडम. अगर आप कोई इनमें से हो जिनको लंबे एपिसोड देखना पसंद नहीं है, देन आई हाईली रिकमेंड यू टू चेक आउट आवर सेकंड चैनल कॉल्ड जस्ट क्यूरियस क्लिप्स, जहाँ पे हम 2 से 10 मिनट की क्लिप्स रखते हैं फ्रॉम आवर पॉडकास्ट एपिसोड. On that note, welcome to another episode of Just Curious podcast where we decode the mindset of our guest through curiosity. And on today's episode, I decoded the mindsets of Tanushree and Hannah. Welcome guys, welcome to Just Curious podcast.
Hi.
thank you.
I was reading through one of your articles and in that there was one thing from former MLA during Mizoram insurgency period that, demanding independence from India is like hitting a thick stone wall and nothing will come out of it. It is, I think, from, if I'm pronouncing the name right, Mr. A. Thanglura.
Yes.
Yeah. So he said this during the Mizoram insurgency period. Like, what do you think? How Mizoram has changed? How some of the scenarios have changed? So I had, I had a privilege of calling Mr. Ashish Kundra. He has written a book called Resurgent Northeast. So from that, I gained a lot of perspective about Northeast, which I did not know about, to be very honest. So what are some of the things changed, especially in Mizoram? Because he was talking a lot about Mizoram as well and how Mizoram is growing and lot of advancements are there right now. But what do you think? You have grown up there. You are right now working also there. What are some of the changes has happened after they got that state independent?
Yeah, a lot has changed. We have a lot of advancements, but every time there's this discrimination towards Northeast people or any issues regarding all these communal conflicts happen, there are a certain section of a certain section of, especially within political parties, who still thinks that it would be a better idea to have independence. But I think regarding independence, I think we should talk more about integration and brotherhood and these kind of things instead of talking about independence on and on. Because to a certain extent, I think we ourselves as a community are also sometimes just distancing ourselves from the larger national how do I say this mainland India. Of course, we have our physical difference, cultural difference, but that's just part of being that's just what we have to face being part of a big nation. So going back to your question, yes, there are a lot of advancement which has happened because of the fact that we gained statehood. I cannot imagine what it would be like if we had got the independence as they had demanded, because I really don't know how to picture that kind of scenario. But I think the kind of changes and advancements that we have right now as part of being in the Indian nation. I think this is what's best for Mizoram as a state.
Yeah. And do you think I've read in, I think in one of your article, or I was just going through reading about Mizoram, like there has been erasement of, lot of values and uh culture that people used to,
Mm-hmm.
like Mizo people used to have. And with the certain advancement of, internet and technology and all those things,
Mm-hmm.
people are moving towards Western influence and all those things.
Uh-huh.
Do you think when we talk about history itself, I think a lot of time history also deal with a lot of culture identity of people of,
Hmm.
certain region, certain area. So what do you think that how it is affecting right now, that and how it is the state of, like what are some of the basic values and cultural differences, that cultural identity that Mizo people have, that does that still prevail in them, or they are forgetting about those things. So for let's example, I am a Gujarati, so there are certain
Huh.
traits and values that we believe
Mm-hmm.
in as a Gujarati people. So are there any certain things that people are actually forgetting and not following those things, or you are seeing those things right now?
Um, I don't know, but because I'm kind of always opposed to these kind of things when people say, you're forgetting about your cultural values. Westernization has kind of depleted culture and tradition. Because if we are to progress as a community and and as a people, I think it's inevitable that we kind of slowly let go of many things from the past. And I think even today, not just in the context of Mizoram, even in other places, even you are saying that kind of thing from your perspective. I think we are doing really good in keeping alive the kind of tradition and cultural values that we have, because uh, as I've said, it's inevitable. We have to incorporate a lot of the things which advancements and progress are throwing at us. So you can't always cling to the past, and and there are so many spaces and instances and circumstances where we cannot practice the kind of traditional practices that was done in the past. So I think even in terms of language, there are, for instance, in my place, in my community, there are there have been sayings that school children are being taught too much in English. They have to, we have to teach them Mizo language to make them appreciate the mother tongue. But I don't think you can really forget about your mother tongue and what your intrinsic tradition is. And I think, especially in the case of children, parents and caretakers play a very big role in keeping alive these kind of traditions.
Yeah, yeah, true, true. So talking about, you talked about progress,
Hmm.
and Tanushree, in your book, as I mentioned to you, there is this line in the historical note that, in 76 years of independence, a lot has changed in India, but yet some of the things have remained frozen in time.
Yeah.
Can you tell me uh, how many things which you think about, or some of the things which matters to you are still frozen in time, in terms of people का mindset बहुत ज्यादा change नहीं हुआ, या तो फिर उनका perception अभी
See,
भी उसके ऊपर बहुत ज्यादा change नहीं हुआ
mm,
है?
see, when we talk about Himachal or any of these so-called touristy places, we mostly focus on the Instagrammable places and
Yeah.
nicely covered by roads, and you have these beautiful pictures and kids smiling and everything. When you truly stay there, and that is actually true for, I think, anywhere in our country,
Hmm.
or I could even venture to say anywhere in the world, that there would still be places which are actually frozen in time in terms of, as you said, mindset, in terms of practices, in terms of facilities available. So we have traveled to places where electricity is still a thing. We have traveled to places where the water sources are separate for separate castes. I've been to schools where I went for reading. I mean, in fact, my one of my first introduction to kids in Himachal was that I um, went into the school armed with a book, and I asked the principal if I could read to them. And obviously, they were a little taken aback. There is this woman who's just shown up and she says, I want to read to the children. And so they were also very curious. They let me. Couple of things I noticed there was that the kids had no idea that books existed outside their textbooks. So they had no ideas where our country had gone in the last so many years, and we had so much of so many books and so many things that were happening. They had no idea of that, and said they were very excited about looking at those big pictures and listening to the story. That was one. The second was that during the lunch break, I noticed that a couple of kids were sitting separately in another corridor. I initially, with my city mindset, thought that they must be the class, those popular kids who don't really want to mix around with the other ones. And so I generally, I went to them and I asked that, why are you sitting here? Why aren't you sitting with your friends and eating there? They didn't say anything. They can continue to eat. The caretaker or the junior teacher, I think. So she came and whispered that, they are from the other caste. No, that's why they are sitting there. I literally, at that time, I felt as if I was just frozen there. I didn't know how to react. And because when you're living in a city, especially with your blinkers on, you think that these things do not exist anymore. And you think that what you read in the newspapers is happening to someone else at some other place. And it's not something you'll encounter ever in your life. You also somewhere think that, you are not a part of that system. I'm above all this. And I don't think in terms of caste. That is fine. But even if you're witnessing it and you're not really doing anything about it, doesn't that also sort of, make you complicit in the whole thing? So these discoveries, that, and then when we actually started staying there, and people would, they were working for us, and then also it was a conscious choice that we are not going to employ people according to caste, because that was a thing there, that people if you employ one caste, the other caste won't come and work for you or not eat at your place, things like that. And we made a conscious decision that that is not how we are. That is not what we are going to promote. And you're here just for work. So if you work, you stay. If you don't work, you go. Your caste has got nothing to do with it. And that's when I discovered these stories, that these things have stayed since anyone could remember. So independence or no independence, the caste was very much there. The temples were separate. People were working in those temples, building them, but they could not enter them once the it
Temple
was
is
all
built.
yes, and it's all functional. Then they can't go in. So these things are very much there. Kids have to walk, at an even more than 45 minutes. I know kids who have to walk for 45 minutes to 1 hour to reach a school. And we are talking about, look at it from a city child's perspective, who would create a fuss to get on the bus in the morning. They used to walk. They walk every day. And then they would have to come home and then go and get fodder for the cattle. And so it's a very, very different life from the city. And in a lot of things, you feel that time hasn't really touched them that much.
But do you think this things ki like let's say casteism and the things that you have talked about, people still doing there, do you think
not there, everywhere,
everywhere,
not just there.
everywhere when we witness this, and like we get this, I will not call this trauma, but trauma, certain kind of behavior, fears from our parents, from our grandparents, and all from our ancestors as well. Because let's say I'm going to give a very silly example, but this is what I believe. Let's say in my so my mother, father, both are very scared of dogs. So that's why I've always saw them being scared of dogs. And that's why there's a fear in me always when I'm being surrounded by dogs. I'm never comfortable there. And I'm just relating to this thing to a lot of other values as well. Like subtly it is happening in my house because it is very okay. So let's say I have this notion, which I'm correcting myself a lot of times. I am grown up in a family where sports is a very usual thing to watch. Like there's always a sports channel going on. If you're not watching sports, you are not a man of your house. Like, or you, let's say you are not in those conversations where people are talking about cricket, football, all those things and all this. It was very normal for me. So when I moved from my college outside of my hometown, and there certain like boys and certain friends of my friend circle, they were actually not at all into sports. They were all about music and all those things. And it took me a lot of time to gel up with them, because there's just some sort of notion which I had. अगर आप लड़के हो, अगर स्पोर्ट्स तो तुम्हें देखना ही चाहिए. Like there is no other way around it. I corrected myself that. So do you think this kind of things, I'm talking about very layman and very basic things, but do you think this kind of thing where we get this casteism and all those things also, where we see some of the people or some of the societal people around us doing this kind of things?
So, see, lack of questioning is one of the things that would obviously, you just get along and do whatever is being done because you just don't question a lot of things.
हाँ,
ऐसे ही होता है, यहाँ पे ऐसे ही चलता है.
true.
When I pose those questions, um, a lot of times I see that कि अगर मेरे घर पे जो काम कर रहे हैं वहां मैं कुछ देखती हूँ, और मैं अगर वो मैं प्रिटेंड ऐसा करती हूँ कि मुझे कुछ नहीं समझ में आ रहा है ना, मैं ये ऐसे क्यों किया, या ऐसा उसके साथ ऐसा क्यों बोला, या ऐसा जो भी वॉट एवर एक्स वाई जेड क्यों किया. यहाँ पे ऐसे ही होता है, ऐसे ही है, वो भी नहीं माइंड करते हैं. सो देर आर दीज assumptions and there are these the lack of questioning. All right. Now but then हर चीज हम सीख के नहीं, मतलब देख के नहीं सीखते हैं. My parents never really liked dogs. I've always had dogs. The only difference is उन्होंने मुझे कभी रोका नहीं. उन्हें
Correct.
पसंद नहीं था लेकिन उन्होंने मुझे कभी नहीं रोका. In like they would kind of protest, क्या सारा दिन तुम you keep picking up dogs and you keep getting them over and all that. Now I have 10 dogs. So it's very different from what my parents. So
Correct.
every generation, वो तो difference होगा ही. Things will improve if there is more education. Things will improve if there are some people asking some questions. If there is some amount of spark that you just एक तरह से एक चिंगारी लगाना कि आपने एक थोड़ा सा क्वेश्चन एक करके छोड़ दिया, तो वो देर आर वेज अराउंड इट. बिकॉज अगर हम सिर्फ इन नोशंस के साथ ही रहते कि हमने जो सीखा हम वही करते जाते, तो देयर वुड हैव बीन नो प्रोग्रेस. हम वहीं रहते हमेशा से, देयर वुड हैव बीन नो चेंजेस.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that things change also and right on their head means that as we go along हम अपने notions भी change करते हैं, हम अपनी learnings को भी unlearn करते हैं. So
Right.
yeah.
True. True. What's your opinion on this, Hannah?
Yeah, I think what struck my mind was that in one of the I forgot the name of the interview or the session that I did with Tanushree. She said that the purpose of her book was to instill a sense of curiosity in children. So I think to make them curious, to question certain things is very important, so that
Yeah.
there are certain traditions that need to be in that we need to break. There are many practices which has to be eradicated. So in
Yeah.
order for children to do that, they have to be curious, they have to question the system or those bad practices. So I think this is also one of the reasons why we write books like this, to make them question, to make them curious, to make them aware about certain things which are not good, and to make them be able to differentiate between what is good and what is bad.
Yeah.
So
But don't you guys think that these people always know that this is bad? They are not treating us really well. So I was just watching Made in Heaven season 2, and in that there's this episode with Radhika Apte, where Radhika Apte is belong to a Dalit family, and he's going to get married with a guy who is from like Brahmin or very upper caste, let's say. So in that, when she's fighting for her rights, where boy's family is deciding that we are going to do a Hindu wedding, and she demands for a Dalit wedding as well, Buddhist wedding as well. And her family stops her, that why are you protesting their opinions, and why are you not like understanding that we are belonging from this particular caste and we are getting used to this, so please understand this, don't questions always all the things. So don't you think people who are suffering from this as well, they they are not showing a lot of courage, or they understand that something bad is happening with us, but they are not addressing at all those issues.
See, it's not as simple as that.
Hmm.
इट्स आप अपने आप को रख के देखिए। आपको अगर कहीं पे जाने से ये कहा जाए कि आप इधर हाथ नहीं लगा सकते हैं, या आप इस पानी के कुएं में से पानी नहीं भर सकते हैं, या आप इस मंदिर में नहीं जा सकते हैं, या अगर खाना कम्युनल बन रहा है तो आप नहीं खा सकते हैं, या आपके घर से कोई आया है तो वो एक पर्टिकुलर कास्ट नहीं खा सकता है। पुट योर सेल्फ इन दोज शूज एंड देन थिंक के व्हाई वुड यू नॉट प्रोटेस्ट। that's a very I think that's a very you know काइंड ऑफ जो हम प्रिविलेज्ड थॉट एक है कि क्यों फिर वो प्रोटेस्ट क्यों नहीं करते हैं, बिकॉज देयर आर सो मेनी अदर सर्कमस्टेंसेस। एक गांव है जो कहीं एक तरह से वो एक को डिपेंडेंट एनवायरनमेंट है जिसमें सब एक दूसरे के साथ एक डिपेंडेंसी है। a lot of times they just don't want to upset it. Of course everyone feels bad, of course, and I have had those conversations, and where there is a lot of despair, there is some amount of resignation, but there's always this क्यों हमारे साथ ऐसा क्यों, हम कैसे अलग हैं, right? वो upset नहीं करते हैं because somewhere there is fear also, somewhere you it's a very uncharted territory. You don't know what will happen. आपको ये भी नहीं पता है आप क्या करेंगे, कैसे, क्या, how can you change this? जब आपकी सुबह से लेके शाम तक आपकी पूरी लाइफ का हिस्सा है आपके स्कूल, इमेजिन एक गवर्नमेंट स्कूल, वहां पे भी आप देख रहे हो, तो आप उस सारे सिस्टम को कैसे चेंज करोगे? इट्स टू ओवरवेलमिंग ऑल्सो। सो इट इज नॉट जस्ट कंप्लेसेंसी कि हाँ ठीक है भाई, या मेरे में हिम्मत नहीं है, ऐसा नहीं है। इट्स द एनॉर्मिटी ऑफ दिस टास्क, दैट हाउ डू यू इवन एड्रेस इट, राइट? एंड देन एज पेरेंट्स, सी, पेरेंट्स अपने बच्चों को क्या कहेंगे, तुम रहने दो, लेट इट बी। व्हाई? बिकॉज दे वांट देम टू बी सेफ। वो नहीं चाहते हैं कि वो आइसोलेट हो, वो ये चाहते हैं तुम अपना फोकस करो, तुम अपना पढ़ाई पे ध्यान दो, कुछ बन जाओ, एंड देन probably you'll be free of whatever you're facing right now. And it is not just limited to this what we have brought up in the book, जो आप लेटर टू लाहौर में जब आप वो पढ़ते हैं, और those references, this is something I've seen as a professor in college. I've seen in the city. I can see that difference on the basis of caste, on the basis of gender, on the basis of religion. वो दिखता है, रोज दिखता है, कभी बहुत subtle differences दिखेंगे, कभी right in your face. So it's not just, the answer is not that simple. It's not about courage. It's not about that at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hannah, your perspective?
Yeah, I think even when we talk about shaping an individual who is curious, who questions the system, there is always the issue with parents, because I think in every community, in every culture, respecting your parents, obeying your parents is a generally taught value. But I think that is where other caretakers like teachers and these kind of people step in. For instance, even in when Tanushree was talking about the school in that place, uh, you know those are children who have never been introduced to books which could be read for pleasure, but uh, maybe their parents don't provide that. But when someone like Tanushree steps in, they are introduced to that kind of new thing. So I think many a times parents may not be able to give them or teach them the kind of value that need to be taught, because from what I can I can take from what Tanushree was saying, a lot of time it's a protective mechanism for
Yeah.
parents,
Yeah.
because they don't want them to be ridiculed. They don't want them to be they don't want them to they don't want their children to be labeled as a rebel in society.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a protective mechanism for that, for them. But for teachers and other even writers like us, I think it's a big duty from our side to, step in where parents, I won't say they lack, but I'd like to say they're afraid to make them, make them rebel and make them go out into the world like that.
At least
or
question
at
somewhere,
least question, or at least make
just
them curious
question.
about these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so they can take that initial first step by themselves, not fighting
Yes.
against the system and all those big things,
Yeah.
but at initially they should address those things.
Yeah.
Correct. I have a very interesting question for both of you. So I was going through your, the bio that I got, and there's this term in your, bio, Tanushree, that you are a positive psychology professor, and in Hannah, it was, you are expert in trauma writing as well. So I want to start with Tanushree. Positive psychology, how it is different from psychology? What is the difference?
Okay, psychology, it's not, it's a part of psychology, first of
Okay,
all.
okay,
Psychology is a bigger bubble
a
in this,
bigger,
you know.
huh.
So, you can say the difference is in the approach. Traditionally, we have always focused on healing, how to cure, and how to fix things. Now, positive psychology believes in our inner strength, the power of gratitude, power of mindfulness to improve your overall well-being. We believe that we all have certain character strengths, which if we build upon them, we have a better, happier life. Just to, sort of put it in layman terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you? Like how I just wanted to know, because I'm very curious about knowing more about the writing part. How, like, in trauma writing, what's the separation? Like it will be a part of a writing, the big bracket only. But what is trauma writing? Can you give me like a brief introduction about it, Hannah?
Yeah, trauma writing is basically when, survivors or people who have experienced a certain kind of trauma uses the art of writing or the process of writing in order to, navigate their emotions and what they feel about that kind of event. And the reason, what got me interested was, I don't want to talk about it in a very academic term, but
Yeah.
what got me interested was when I was writing my book, When Blackbirds Fly. I went around doing interviews with many of the old people who had who were involved in that independence movement during the insurgency. So what I realized was that as I was flipping through the Mizo literature that we have, I realized that a very big chunk of, I don't know, I don't want to bring it down to a percentage, but a large chunk of Mizo literature that we have is about the Mizo insurgency. So there are a lot of writings where, you know, people who were involved during the independence movement who have suffered loss and violence, uh, how they wrote about their experience. So we have a lot of books in Mizo literature, that kind of books. So even when I was going around interviewing people, what I realized was that although there were people who were very reluctant to talk about their experience during the insurgency, a majority of them were very open about open to talk about it. So I think that kind of that was kind of therapeutic and cathartic for them, because for them to talk about or write about their traumatic experiences kind of allow them to release any kind of negative emotion that they might have harbored regarding that event. So in trauma writing, I think, writing gives the survivors or those people who have experienced the traumatic event a kind of release of any negativity that they felt towards it. So and also the reason why I wrote books like When Blackbirds Fly was because my mother's family was a very they suffered a very big loss during the insurgency. Her father was killed by the Indian Army soldiers during the insurgency. So uh, there was a lot of psychological effect in my grandmother and in my mother as well. So I think writing about these things, not just from the survivors, but also from the survivors' family, from people, even I wasn't born during that time. I had no idea what the insurgency looked like. I just know it from what my mother told me, from the kind of books that I've read. But writing about it kind of was also kind of cathartic for me as well, because it helped me understand what my mother went through, what my grandmother went through, even though I did not have a real life experience. Writing about that traumatic experience kind of bridges the generational gap that was between me and my mother, between me and my grandmother. So I think that is how I look at trauma writing.
Mhm. Mhm. So, like, do you think that when people suffers losses like this in their family,
Mm.
uh, certain kind of uh, like as we were talking about, in the previous answers as well, there are certain kind of like fears, or let's say trauma, that get passed on the other members. Because I was listening to one of your lit festival panel discussions, where you kind of talked about this with other authors as well, and they were kind of talking about this, where so one of the author told us that trauma is also one of the ways to know more about culture and identity.
Mm-hmm.
It is also related with that. So do you think that when a family suffers this kind of losses, that trauma just passes on in their behaviors in a subtle way, in a way that might you have noticed in your mother or your grandmother?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Because, for instance, during the insurgency, there was a lot of army atrocities which the civilians suffered. So, for people like my mother who were small children during that time, any sight of the sight of any man with a mustache, because many of the Indian army men during that time were men with mustaches. So any non-Mizo guy, so to say, someone from outside the community with a mustache, whenever they see that kind of person, they are, struck with a certain kind of fear, because it kind of
It is associated with
reminded
a
them
bad
about the
memory.
haha, yes. So those kind of things happen. And also, even in one of my interviews, there was a woman who kind of gets triggered whenever she smell the smell of burnt wood, because during that time her village was set on fire, so the smell of burnt wood always reminded her of the burnt village. So I think that is how these trauma remain, or become very real even after many years in, in not just in it's not just psychological, it's still a lived experience for many people.
Yeah, and in your book as well, the grandmother is very reluctant for like her daughter and the main protagonist of your book to work
Hmm.
at a British army
Ha, ha,
officer
ha.
house. That's why, because her husband was in Mizo chief army, if I'm not wrong, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, true. Understood. So I want to get some recommendation. What are some of the books that you both have read around freedom that changed your perspective regarding that as well, after writing this book or before writing this book, around freedom, or on this topic only? So that's start. We will start with Tanushree.
So honestly, songs of freedom
So
only, because I'll tell you why. I'm not a huge history fan. I've said this
okay,
before in my interviews that I wasn't a huge history fan, mostly because of the way it was taught to us. It was
yeah,
not very interesting, and I think it would be more of there would should be more of storytelling. Storytelling should be a backbone of teaching history to children.
but we are remembering
And
dates.
yeah, so we are
Uh,
remembering dates and names, and when what happened, and that really was very dry for me. And so when I read this series, I started with Lubena's book, and it was that it really made me get more interested in sort of learning more about the times and learning more about what was happening in other parts, and not just the main cities and not just these main names. So that is one. Then there was another book called Ahimsa. This was by Kelkar, if I'm right. We'll have to check the name because I read it quite a few years back.
huh.
That's another one, which is based around independence. Again, a children's book and fiction, historical fiction, but it gets you to question, it gets you interested. So it was after I started. I mean, in fact, when I read the first book of the series, I didn't even know. I didn't even think that I would be ever be a part of the series, because I mean, where do you stand with such great writers?
Mhm.
And but it just happened, and I'm so glad that I read it and I ventured into writing one for myself.
Nice. What are some of your recommendations? Because I know, Anna, you read a lot of books.
Oh, I read them too,
Um,
but not historical.
Ha, ha, ha.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of historical fiction, but um, I'll confess I don't read much on the books surrounding the freedom movement. I've read Rushdie's Midnight Children as part of our college syllabus, and I've watched Captain Marvel, where the partition event was largely
Yeah.
highlighted. But other than that, I'm not really. I've never really read books around. Like Tanushree said, maybe we need these kind of books
Yeah.
which are like not textbook, very textbook based. Because I think what in middle school, in high school, we were introduced to our introduction to modern India history in history subject was, we get so much textbook information regarding the freedom movement that we kind of get tired about it. So I think there is really a need for more historical fiction surrounding events, important events like this.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
sorry, Usaf, I don't have any recommendation.
No.
So one of the authors that you might want to explore is Devika Ramachari, and I think her first book.
Ah, yes.
The one book that I distinctly remember was, I think it's called Harshvardhan. I don't know whether it's in print anymore or not. It was a part of a workshop that we went to, a writer's workshop. In fact, that's when I started taking my writing seriously, and it was in the recommended list. And that's when I realized, oh, historical fiction for children exists, and that too based in India. Because as Hannah said, most of the books that we have read are, I mean, they are international, and
Mhm.
historical fiction, also what we have read, is mostly based somewhere in
हाँ, तो
Europe
उस
or,
उसका कोई बता दो
है
ना.
ना?
ऐसा नहीं, like I don't want कि any particular there is a guardrail towards it. Tell me about anywhere, like let's say
Ah,
any
Hannah, you
freedom.
go, because I usually freeze when anyone asks me list, and I'm like, frozen. What do I say? Which one do I
Uh,
recommend? Go.
I'm a big fan of Ken Follett. He writes a good historical fiction because what I remember was when I was in my bachelor's, I took history as one of my elective papers, and what I remember was I read two of his books, Fall of Giants and World of Winters, where he talked about the two world wars. A very nice historical fiction books. So I did not study at all for my examination. There were a lot of classes which I bunked, but I was able to score a very good mark in my history papers because of Ken Follett's novel. So um, I highly recommend it.
Right. तनुश्री, कोई दिमाग में आया आपके?
See, he's not historical. As I said,
हाँ,
I've never been a historical fiction per se fan.
हाँ.
Frances Harding is one of my favorite writers. I think I've read
Ah,
everything
yes.
that she's written. And I literally have caught people and forced them to read her books. Strong female characters, fantasy, and it is somewhere. It's a very intelligent commentary on the times, yet not set in the times. So I would really, really strongly recommend Frances Harding.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I now I have a very silly questions to you guys. Like when you authors meet at, let's say, Jaipur Literature Festival or Tata Literature Festival, what you guys talk about? Do you discuss each other's book, or what you guys talk about?
We discuss everything except books.
Very true.
But what are some of the topics you enjoy the most talking about, Tanushri? Let's say apart from writing and psychology, what are some of the interesting things you enjoy talking about?
I don't know. I mean, I can't really say that anything, everything,
मतलब
anything
कोई,
at all.
like let's say you have to a bond with a person, like
Yeah.
you by talking about what kind of topics you can bond really quickly with a person, like why
Dogs, cats.
dogs. Hmm.
Dogs and cats.
Wow. For
Yes.
Hannah, for you?
I don't know. For it, like, to follow up your previous question, when I went to the Tata Lit Fest, there was a lot of discussion on wine and food. I think that's what, when writers get together, what
Yeah.
they talk about mostly. But in my case, I was asked a lot about my community, Mizoram, because it's still a very unpopular, part of India. And but what what made me really happy was that 5 years back, 10 years back, when we were studying outside Mizoram, I was doing my studies in Hyderabad. There were many instances when I get asked, when I say I come from Mizoram, they would say, which country is that, or I would be asked for my passport in many instances. But I think the scenario has changed, because in the past few years, whenever I travel outside the state or outside my community, um, I no longer get silly questions like that. There are people who have said, I've been to Mizoram, that there is so much awareness about the entire geography of the Northeast. So even when I went to the Tata Lit Fest last year, there was a lot of questions and discussions that they had with me about Mizoram. And I think that is still what is needed, to make people aware about our stories, our history, and our region.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I also have some of the few questions, so please bear with me. I'm going to ask
No
you,
problem.
Hannah, I wanted to, for setting a lot of context about your book as well. I just wanted to ask you that, what was happening in like in all those insurgency period, war complexities which was happening in Mizoram, after Second World War, or uh, up until the 19 uh 88s or 80s.
Hmm.
What were some of those war complexity? Can you just walk me through that, so people like me can understand really better?
Hmm. So, yeah, the colonial experience in Mizoram is very different from other places, because um, because the evangelical work of the missionaries was very prominent. So that is why we can't have a very strong post-colonial stance, even when it comes to writing about colonial times. So in the 1940s, we have colonial administrators out here in Mizoram, but like I've said, the English missionaries were a big the missionary work was a big project out here. They brought a lot of advancements. They, in terms of education, in terms of health and sanitation and that kind of thing. So, for the Mizo community to look at the Britishers as a colonial administrators, and as how do I don't want to use this word, but I can't find any other word, as oppressors, is very difficult, because the majority of the Britishers, the English that we see out here, are the missionaries who have provided us with all kinds of advancements. But what I wanted to highlight in my book was that, alongside that evangelical work, which we greatly benefited from, there was also that political colonial administration, which was doing a lot of cultural damage. For instance, there was an eradication of the chieftainship. Many of the villages were asked to do coolie work. There was a lot of oppressive system going on, um, and not just in the literature, even in the talks and discussions and the overall idea about the colonial experience, these things are, pushed to the sideline. How do I say this? It's being overshadowed by the missionary work. So that
Mm.
is why I wanted to highlight that part in my book. And in the 1940s, the colonial administration was going on in full swing in Aizawl, in Mizoram, and the insurgency came way later in the 1960s. Um, it started in 1966, yes, and it went on for 20 years. And after that, we got statehood. So that's a very rough the political history of Mizoram.
Oh, can you just explain what
Okay.
happened during those 20 years, like 1966 to 1986?
So the demand for independence happened, and then Mizoram was declared a disturbed area, and um,
Mizoram was
it really
under. Mizoram was
it
under.
was it was under the
Uh,
it was a district under Assam. It was one of
okay.
the districts under Assam. So it was declared as a disturbed area. The president's rule was imposed, and the Indian armies were being sent. So the it was main. I don't like it when people say Mizoram demanded independence. It was a political party, the MNF, which demanded independence. So the clash between the MNF and the Indian army was what really created all the violence and the atrocities. So during that time, there was a grouping of villages. A lot of villages were burned. A lot of people were killed. Many lives were lost. And what I think what was really significant was that that demand made by one political party turned into a traumatic experience for the entire region, for the entire Lushai Hills. So so during those 20 years, a lot of army atrocities happened. The army occupation had it had a lot of negative effect on the people, and so after the 20 years, the MNF, the political party who demanded independence, they went underground. They went into hiding. So after the 20 years, they kind of surrendered. They they struck the they signed the peace accord, and that was when Mizoram was given statehood.
Wow. I think a lot of people like me and all the other people, why I asked you this, because a lot of people will get to know more about, what happened during those times, and they will get little bit more perspective regarding that. My
Yes.
honest effort with, Ashish Kundra was also that to know more about Northeast. What are some of the things, let's say, a parents should inculcate in their kids, because the books that you guys are writing about are more about middle age, kids. So my question to you will be to both of you: what are some of the things which parents should inculcate in them and make aware them about, or make curious them about certain kind of topics apart from, let's say, freedom, so they can get little bit more curious towards those things and can become a better person, or let's say at least understand world from different perspective.
So I think more than what we should, we need to focus on what we should not. You should not
Okay.
be culling a child's curiosity. More than the, don't do this, don't do that. It should be, if we are able to inculcate that kind of a questioning spirit, that, when the children question, you're able to answer those, you're able to come back with the answer. You're able to, it's a tough one sometimes, but if you keep doing that, they don't stop asking questions. They don't take things for granted, and they don't just resign to things. So I think that's more so. As a parent, I won't say that conversations about certain topics, conversations about all topics, everything. Talk about everything. There is nothing which is off the table. There is nothing which our children need to be protected from. They are way more evolved than we think they are. It's just to put them in age appropriate terms. But you need to discuss everything. And I think if I were to identify two things that I would want every child to have is empathy and curiosity.
Mhm. Yeah. And what about you, Hannah?
Um, yeah, I totally agree with what Tanushree said, and I think with books like this, especially when it comes to a series, you can't pinpoint the kind of values that you want to impart because we're writing from different backgrounds, from different cultures, from different historical setup. So it's kind of, the values that they get from these books will be very different, but I think at the end of the day, what really matters is that they have an awareness about the diversity of things, about cultures, about places, about even values. Because if I read about Tanushri's book, I would be I would be aware of many of the things that I don't know about the place that she's writing, and same goes with my book. So yeah, to create an awareness about all kinds of things. And I totally agree that children need not be restricted from anything. We just have to give them a safe space and in a safe environment where they can know about. all kinds of things in an appropriate way. And I think reading is books like this provide them that kind of safe environment and safe space.
Yes. But so this was my last question, and as you both mentioned, curiosity and being curious. My podcast name is Just Curious, and one of the major thing which I want in my audience to have that ability to being just curious about things. Because मैं बहुत बार बोलता हूँ कि when एप्पल when आइंस्टाइन के ऊपर जब एप्पल गिरा तब उसने क्वेश्चन पूछा कि ये क्यों गिरा, and that's when the journey of discovering gravity started. So all this big things discovered by great men started with a very small curiosity and a very small question about things कि ये ऐसा क्यों नहीं है या तो फिर ये ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है, and that's why they discover as well. So curiosity always gives you new perspective, and it can encourage you to take that first or second step as well. But thank you so much, guys, for doing this. I really had a great time discussing about different things. This was completely new for me, but I hope you guys also enjoyed it. And to all the people who are watching, I'm going to link the links of the books in the description. Please buy it. It is very interesting. It is a very short read as well, so it will not take too much of your time from your schedule to read these books as well. And if you are a parent who is watching this, please give these books to your children to read it. They will gain a lot of new perspectives about different things about the Indian society. But thank you so much, Tanushree, and thank you so much, Hannah, for doing this.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.